Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it's a strange coincidence that just as heads of states descend on Rome for the G20 and Glasgow for the UN Climate Change Conference, the world is in the grips of the most serious energy crisis in over a decade. In Europe and Asia, natural gas markets are on red alert with prices at record highs. And there is clear evidence of shortages across the world as demand continues to recover from the pandemic. Natural gas is now the most expensive fossil fuel on an energy equivalent basis, comparable to an oil price of about $200 per barrel. As the winter season of peak demand approaches in the Northern Hemisphere, the crisis will only deepen. It's critical that we don't turn a climate crisis into an energy crisis. Expectations for Glasgow are understandably high, as COP26 is considered a critical moment for collective action to address global warming. Climate ambitions are bumping up against stubborn realities of the global energy supply chain. We are here today to discuss how we can reconcile these two critical needs. Even as renewables have made important and impressive advances, the global energy mix has remained stable over the past 30 years, with hydrocarbons accounting for something close to 80% of primary energy demand. The pandemic produced a momentary dip, but demand is now rebounding fast, and our latest analysis and other leading forecasts show that the fourth quarter of this year may well exceed 2019. In other words, a full recovery. It is a simple fact that energy is so indispensable to human life, and particularly to human prosperity, that when demand rises fast, shortages quickly drive up prices. Demand is so inelastic that it quickly creates damaging knock-on effects across the economy. Increased prices are like a tax on consumers, increasing poverty. When consumers are faced with a scarcity of gas, they simply switch to oil or coal, causing more CO2 emissions, which is what we are seeing today. I'm also particularly worried that high energy prices will deepen socioeconomic divides and, more importantly, undermine public support for climate action. Once we lose public support, it will be very hard to gain back. So we need to keep making progress on climate action while at the same time ensure we have the energy supplies today to power development and growth. The current energy market situation also affects a still uneven and fragile global economic recovery. Sustained high prices and volatility may reset inflation expectations and will hit energy import dependent economies and low income groups the hardest. The IMF projects that global growth may slow by 0.3% in 2021 and 0.5% in 2022 as a direct consequence of higher and more volatile energy prices. In December of last year, even as the pandemic was destroying demand, the IEF issued a report on investment in the new oil and gas development, and raised a warning flag about a pending supply crunch. I regret to say that our predictions turned out to be quite prescient. While it is only right that climate action should be led by large industrialized nations that are most responsible for the high levels of CO2 in our atmosphere, it is also true that emerging markets will account for the lion's share of emissions growth over the next decade. So we need an energy transition that works for all. It's notable that UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain have all recently announced ambitious plans to achieve net zero. But many emerging economies have yet to make similar pledges, in many cases because the promised funding from developed nations has yet to materialize. So it is simply not enough to press for more renewables. The world urgently needs more investment in energy supplies, new technologies to mitigate carbon emissions, such as carbon capture, and adaptation support to vulnerable countries. The IEF is pleased to host today's special gas market dialogue, which is evidence of our commitment to convene global energy dialogue between producer and consumer nations to enhance energy security and market stability. An open exchange of views here and over the next several weeks and months can help restore market stability and affirm investor confidence. So let's get on with our program today. I have the distinct pleasure to be joined by ministers from two major Asian growth economies that rely on gas imports to energize the hopes and aspirations of growing populations while reducing emissions. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to Your Excellency, Dr. Tawfiq El Alahi Chaudhry, the Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources Affairs of Bangladesh. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the open remarks do summarize the crisis that we are in now. Bangladesh is a developing country and we are a net importer of fossil fuel. Now we are between the horns of the dilemma. While the gas price has gone through the roof, which have been our anchor to move towards a clean energy pathway, that seems kind of blocked. On the other hand, the global COP26 will be needing to find a solution to the existential threat of humanity. Now, how do we balance the two? That is the biggest question for us also. For example, we import about 4 million metric tons of LNG. We had planned, our master plan was anchored on about 30 million metric tons of LNG in the future, because our electricity demand goes up by 10% every year. And we are a growing economy. Our energy intensity is very low, and we have planned to double our power generation capacity in next 10 years. Now, with this energy crisis, our pathway becomes very uncertain. And it is not only an uncertain pathway, the crisis that might hit ordinary folks looms large. It's not only development that we are talking about in a very abstract sense. It is going to affect the life of ordinary folks. You can't provide electricity, we'll be denying mothers of care they can give, we'll deny children of the education they can have, we'll deny rural sector of Bangladesh to mainstream in the commercial market. So this is, for us, electricity, for example, is a merit good. It's not a private good that you can price and achieve the goals of development. The whole emphasis globally is on price. And that has caused, I think, great harms to countries like us. We are about to be priced out of the market. We have very limited resources to achieve our goals. Now, my own suggestion would be that countries like Bangladesh, which are on the front line of sea level rise, while we need assistance for adaptation strategy, we need some kind of assurance from forum like this that our minimum requirement of gas would be ensured. Gas, we thought, was a clean pathway to cleaner energy in future. Now, I hear people demonizing gas, thereby sending negative signal in the market. We have very little opportunities to meet our demand. For example, renewable is only, for us, it's more of a hype than a reality, because unless we have a utility scale storage facility, then renewable is not a choice for us as a mainstream energy mix. Moreover, Bangladesh is populated, that we have scarcity of land to have utility scale, let's say solar. We are planning to have more of solar from water bodies, from swamps, from rivers. Now, all these enterprises, initiatives will be at a loss unless you can find a solution. And a platform like this is a very appropriate body to address. The honorable ministers that are attending here, more of us are net importer of gas than net exporter. So I would request the energy producers to come out with a statement saying that to meet the energy crisis now, we have started planning for the next 5-10 years, which will assure us that we might tighten our belt for a while, but we cannot put our pathway to jeopardy. And another point is that each country, particularly developing countries, have different pathways to clean energy. Some countries have hydro, we don't have hydro. Some people have wind, we don't have wind, etc. Then I would request this forum to promote research and development in storage, like green hydrogen, where fossil fuel can be an input to that storage facility or a carrier of energy. Similarly, in other areas, I see opportunities for small modular reactor, nuclear reactor, because nuclear energy for us looks like an option that would, in the medium long term, would solve our problems. Now, we don't know the choices yet, and I would request this forum, and there are honorable ministers that are attending this forum, to come up with a declaration which addresses the existential threat to humanity and a pathway. I repeat, the pathway. Pledges are no answers. We need to find out what are the pathways of different countries to achieving, let's say, net zero at some point in time in future. And by the way, we have very little carbon footprint. Our carbon footprint is about less than 0.5 metric tons per capita per annum. Most developed countries have about 10 to 15 or 20 metric tons per capita per annum. So countries like us would not make any difference in global warming, but we certainly would like to be a party where we would suggest and participate in the mitigation measures in as much as we need to concentrate on adaptation measures. And I would also suggest to highlight some behavioral change which can be put in place right away. You know, in 70s, there was a speed limit in the United States after the oil shock, and people complied with that. Pandemic has taught us that we can have a hybrid work habit, working from home and even studying from home. These would reduce energy consumption and maybe give to us a new paradigm of learning, a new paradigm of working. There are many other ways of reducing energy intensity right away. So much of food is wasted. If you can concentrate on reducing food wastage, you'd also be doing same thing, and you'd be doing in trying to reduce emission directly. So with those few words, I would like to conclude and like to listen to other colleagues from other countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, for those important comments. And I wonder if I can just pause now and maybe ask you a quick question. I understand that more than half of Bangladesh's electricity comes from natural gas, although some power plants also run on heavy fuel oil and diesel. I'm wondering whether utilities in Bangladesh have been switching to oil as a result of high gas prices, and whether the high gas prices have reduced demand for gas.
You know, unfortunately, we don't have much choice to switch also. We are fixed in a mix where we have been setting up power plants based on gas. So the oil capacity of power generation based on oil is very limited. And it is so expensive for us. It's not only pollutes, but it's so expensive for us to go to diesel or sulfur, HFO, which is again, you know, a very polluting fuel. So we don't have much of a choice, you know, actually. We are caught in a bind, and we can't switch much in terms of energy mix. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now let's turn to remarks from His Excellency Hardeep Puri, the Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas and Housing and Urban Development. He has a dual portfolio of India.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, namaste. I am happy to be participating in this special gas market dialogue organized by Mr. Joseph McMonigal Secretary General, International Energy Forum. This dialogue comes at an appropriate time when the volatility and uncertainty in the energy markets is dominating the narrative. We are confronting record high natural gas prices due to a combination of a strong and post-pandemic recovery in demand and unplanned supply outages, which have led to tighter markets. High natural gas prices have ripple effects on global energy markets, pushing prices up, impacting other economic sectors from factories to utilities, and eventually leading to fuel substitution. The World Bank's latest commodity markets outlook forecasts that natural gas and coal prices are expected to average more than 80% higher in 2021 compared to last year and will remain at high levels in 2022. If energy prices remain high, global economic recovery will be undermined. As far as India is concerned, my government has been vocal in impressing the needs for responsible pricing decided by market forces and not regulated artificially. Excellencies, India is dependent on imports to meet 85% of its oil needs and relies on overseas shipments to meet 55% of its gas needs. In such a scenario, artificially regulated high global energy prices are creating severe challenges for the country. Energy justice is a priority to which our government is committed. We have developed and successfully implemented transformative energy policies whose results are evident. People must have universal access to clean, affordable, sustainable, and equitable supply of energy. With around 16% of the world's population, the per capita energy consumption in India is only 1/3 of the world. Our energy consumption is set to rise as we move towards a $5 trillion economy by 2025. For India's progress, the country's energy interdependence is the need of the hour. Therefore, on our Independence Day this year, Honorable Prime Minister announced a new goal to transform India into an Atma-Nirbhar or energy independent nation before we complete 100 years of independence by 2047. Excellencies, in the context of global LNG markets, I would like to put some key ideas before the forum. I believe that natural gas, despite being a cleaner fuel with significant potential, is yet to achieve its rightful place in global energy markets. As per the Shell LNG Outlook 2021, global LNG demand is expected to reach 700 million tons by 2040, as demand for natural gas continues to grow strongly in Asia and gains further traction in powering hard to electrify sectors. As a result, more supply investment will be needed to avoid the estimated supply-demand gap. Apart from COVID-19 related project delays, the global energy sector's pivot away from fossil fuels towards greener energy supplies has slowed investment in LNG infrastructure, which is affecting supplies. With an increasing number of buyers and suppliers, the LNG markets should evolve to offer a wider choice of commercial structures to meet changing needs. Novel financing options could lead to more flexible contracts with shorter duration and creative pricing. The global LNG markets, in which producers and consumers of LNG have equal stakes, may join hands to design flexible and transparent markets. All natural gas industry players will need to adjust their operating models. They should expect softer prices and encourage swapping and optimization of LNG cargoes. Against the backdrop of increasing net zero emission targets, the industry will need to further innovate to offer cleaner energy supply chains. The growing push for greener LNG over the past year is already transforming the way LNG is sold. Looking forward, I'm confident that we will look to suppliers to provide transparent and reliable data on carbon emissions associated with each cargo. Excellencies, let me also share what India has done to promote natural gas as a transition fuel. Our gas uptake is just 6% of India's primary energy market against a global average of more than 24%. We are rapidly deploying natural gas by targeting to increase the share of natural gas from the current 6% to 15% by 2030 in the primary energy mix. An investment of $60 billion is already underway for developing gas infrastructure, which includes gas pipelines, city gas distribution, and LNG regasification terminals. City gas distribution network is being expanded to provide equitable access to clean cooking fuel across India. We are actively encouraging use of LNG for long-haul trucking along expressways, industrial corridors, inside mining areas, marine inland water-based applications. The new electronic trading platform for natural gas, IGX, has opened a new chapter in the energy history of India and will help the nation move towards free markets pricing of natural gas. A huge campaign of waste to wealth has been undertaken. We are boosting the rural economy by waste to wealth generation under the Sustainable Alternative Towards Affordable Transportation, or SATAT initiative. We are setting up 5,000 composite biogas plants by 2024 with a production target of 15 million metric tons with an investment of about $20 billion. In conclusion, I wish to say that natural gas has an important role to play in complementing low carbon energy solution and should be considered as a bridge fuel for just an orderly global energy transition. I wish all of you successful deliberations. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much to Minister Puri for joining us and for his comments. And I just want to underscore, I think he made a lot of interesting points there. But his initial point, I believe that natural gas, despite being a cleaner fuel with significant potential, is yet to achieve its rightful place in global energy markets. This is really an important statement, and I hope we can explore it further in our future sessions here. But let's turn now to speakers from Central European and Caspian countries, two key countries that anchor new demand and supply connections on the new map of Eurasian energy markets. Let me give the floor to His Excellency George Niculescu, the State Secretary of Energy of Romania. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dear Secretary General, honorable ministers, distinguished participants, first of all, I would like to thank the International Energy Forum for giving me the opportunity to take part in this event on behalf of Minister Popescu and as a representative of the Romanian Ministry of Energy. Before I start, allow me to highlight that Romania, joining one of the largest and most important energy organizations, such as the International Energy Forum, stands as a proof of our commitment to further enhance our national energy security and market stability, as well as to meet the decarbonization and sustainability goals that we have agreed upon. In my opinion, I could see no better time for our debate today concerning the recent rise in the energy prices and the challenges posed by the energy transition. And we all have seen that Europe is facing an unprecedented energy prices in both natural gas and electricity. And the lessons that we need to learn is that at this challenging time, cooperation between countries, I think it is essential in order to provide our citizens with energy at an affordable price and in safe conditions. At the European Union level, the circumstances of this new context were discussed at the European Council meeting last week and also at the Energy Council. And member states are in constant dialogue and coordination with the European Commission, which has outlined a set of measures, a toolbox that would allow the European Union member states to keep natural gas and electricity prices low while tackling with this situation. As you all know, Romania is a producer of natural gas, one of the most important in its region, and our country enjoys significant natural gas reserves, both onshore and offshore, and the natural gas represents an important part in the national energy mix. Therefore, our intention and our wish is to capitalize these national reserves, especially those already identified in the Black Sea waters, which will facilitate a safe energy transition without jeopardizing the energy security. Accessing the energy potential of the Black Sea could offer our country the chance to diversify its natural gas sources. Therefore, the activity of hydrocarbon production in the Black Sea could significantly contribute to increase Romania's energy security. As a governmental authority, we are permanently involved in the efforts to strengthen the energy connectivity in all the Black Sea area. In this context of enhancing energy security, especially for our country, I take the opportunity to stress out once again the role of natural gas. In our view, natural gas is an essential bridge fuel, and we consider that it has an important role to play alongside the renewables energy sources in the transition process of our energy system. Maintaining natural gas as part of the transition will facilitate the replacement of solid fossil fuels. And I think that the lesson to be learned is that countries should cooperate more, should remove obstacles in the free flow of energy, enhance connectivity in terms of real interconnection and specific infrastructures. I do wish to hear more opinions on the current situation, as well as the experience of other countries. I raised my statement here. I thank you for the attention, and I'm looking forward to have an interesting debate. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, George, and also for that little briefing on the EU, the recent EU meeting this past week. That was a most watched event. The minister from Bangladesh mentioned nuclear energy in his comments, and of course, we had the CEO of Romania's Nuclear Electrica give a lecture here in Riyadh at the Secretariat over the weekend. So I'm wondering if you can give us a little update on what Romania specifically has planned on nuclear energy, and how does it contribute to Romania's efforts to reduce dependence on third-party suppliers?
Yes, thank you very much for the questions. Regarding the nuclear power in Romania, we have, as you well know, the most important facility, the only facility is in Cernavoda power plant, which has made its debut 25 years ago. We have a total installed capacity of 1,400 megawatt. And at this moment, Nuclear Electrica is providing around 20% of the total consumption daily of the energy in Romania. So it's an important part of our energy mix. And the commitment of our government is that in the near future, we will start developing 2 more facilities, also in Cernavoda power plant. In this matter, we have an agreement that we signed with our strategic partners, the United States of America, and our commitment is to, as soon as possible, start developing the 3rd and the 4th units of Cernavoda power plant.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Now let's give the floor to His Excellency Kamal Abbasad, the Deputy Minister of Energy of Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Excellencies, dear Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to thank the Secretary General, Joseph Monegal, and IEF team for organizing this dialogue on difficult topic of global gas market, which is particularly important during these unprecedented times of uncertainty and price hikes of historical proportion. Dialogue among concerned stakeholders is important to identify challenges, risks, and to determine how to move forward. It's equally important to hear all voices from the governments, international organizations, and industry leaders. Global energy landscape is undergoing radical changes. Natural gas as an important part of the energy transition helps meet growing energy needs by reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving air quality. The global gas industry has changed significantly over the last decade, and the pace of change is expected to increase further in the coming decades. The effects of pandemic will decrease in the long term, and demand is expected to sustain in coming years. As natural gas is widely used as a fuel in industry and the residential sector, its share in the energy mix will continue to grow. The use of natural gas instead of coal in production of electricity can significantly reduce air pollution by 45–55%. By 2045, about 95% of increase in the gas demand is predicted to come from developing countries, mainly Asia and Middle East. By 2030, natural gas is expected to become the second largest fuel in the energy balance, surpassing coal. Electricity generation and gas-intensive industries are the main factors that increase the demand for gas. Global LNG trade is also expected to increase significantly in the long run. Cold weather and supply difficulties in the different parts of the world have exacerbated price spikes of recent months. According to Energy Intelligence, the current price of natural gas in Europe is equivalent to the price of $150 per barrel of crude oil. This increases in natural gas prices stimulate the transition to other fuels, especially oil. With this complexity of fast-changing conditions, government plays a crucial role in determining their country-specific roads toward climate resilient pathway, and while all times facing difficult choices between affordable energy prices, high growth rates on the one hand and environmentally friendly development on the other. Governments also play an important role in establishing policy and regulatory frameworks for markets and facilitating big projects. Thinking about the big ideas and projects, I cannot stress enough how important is the South Gas Corridor that commissioned last year with enabling role of Azerbaijan in ensuring energy security in wider Caspian region and in Europe. The idea of the South Gas Corridor and the delivery of Azerbaijani gas to Europe seemed unrealistic to many only 10 years ago. However, now it is a reality, and it shows that nothing is impossible in long-term vision combined with the solidarity and cooperation. The South Gas Corridor connects Europe and the Caspian regions with a world-class infrastructure, while contributing to reaching our climate, economic, commercial goals. Last segment of this project, the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, creates opportunities to transport fuels with extremely low climate impact, including hydrogen. Azerbaijan has proven natural gas reserves of 2.5 trillion cubic meters. Over the past 10 years, the country's natural gas production has increased by about 41%. Thus, in 2020, natural gas production increased by 10.8 billion cubic meters compared to the 2010 and amounted to 37 billion cubic meters. In 2025, natural gas production in our country is expected to reach 47.5 billion cubic meters. Natural gas production from the Shahdanis field, the main source of natural gas in South Gas Corridor, is projected to reach 25.5 billion cubic meters this year, and 26.5 billion cubic meters in 2025. In short, Azerbaijan is pleased to continue the path of development that contributes to all the challenges for secure future of the world and is more interested in cooperation with investors. We believe that through the close cooperation, we will jointly contribute to realize of sustainable energy policy based on security, the environment, and sustainable development in the future. I take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this relevant energy dialogue and wish success in your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If I could just ask a quick question while we have you. You mentioned Azerbaijan is ramping up gas production. I'm wondering where the country sees natural gas in terms of its trajectory and its importance to the energy transition. If you could make some comments about that.
Here.
You're muted, sir.
Yes.
Now we can hear you.
For the energy transition, we believe that we have enough the gas resources, and for energy transition, we can use our gas for the production of the hydrogen. As we also, I mentioned that we can also use our South Gas Corridor, the pipelines, also for the transportation of the hydrogen. I think that we have the big potential in this, But nevertheless, all our gas, all the transition to the energy transition, we think that the natural gas will play the main role in our country and in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just ask one more question, how is Azerbaijan ensuring a balance between the ecological, energy, and economic sustainability priorities?
We, as all the other countries, which is Azerbaijan is not. Well, sorry. Can you repeat your questions, because I cannot?
Yeah, sure. I'm just wondering how Azerbaijan is ensuring a balance between ecological, energy, and sustainability priorities.
I think yes. Thanks. We use our traditional energy. We also we also use our solar and wind energy potential to create such mechanism that the new energy sources will cover the demand of our country. It means that we use our traditional energy and also green energy as the solar, wind, and another sources. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn to the United States, a big producer and consumer country. And it's a pleasure to welcome my friend, the Honorable Amos Hochstein, the U.S. State Department Senior Advisor for Global Energy Security. Amos, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, and appreciate the opportunity to be able to join. I apologize for joining late. I'll be brief and more interested in to hear others' views. As we are approaching this week, the G20 this weekend, and the COP26 on following that in Glasgow, I think that wanted to put how we see the context of the energy markets going through some turmoil over the last several weeks, if not several months, and its impacts on how we view and how the world should view the energy transition. As we entered the summer, we continued from there. We find ourselves in somewhat of an energy crisis that has not been created by a single event of a disruption of a natural disaster or a conflict, but rather a confluence of issues that have come to affect us all on different parts of the world. If you start from the terrible drought that we felt in Southwest China and in Brazil that has affected hydropower in a region of China that is heavily reliant on hydropower. We saw that the wind droughts in Northern Europe and specifically the UK, the back-to-back hurricanes in the United States, the fires that led to an important power line between the UK and France, all of these different events, coupled with the fact that we had a late winter burst in Europe at the end of last winter, March, April, and that led to a late draw season and a late injection, and a less than robust filling of the reserves throughout Europe, put us in a position where we have a perfect storm of demand rising unexpectedly in different parts of the world at the same time, where the hydro needs in China were not being able to be met, and therefore natural gas became the obvious choice, and a competition for LNG cargoes as well as for pipeline gas was suddenly came upon us in the late summer, and we saw prices spiking throughout the world. This has really underscored, well, let me just say, this followed with a gas switching from as prices escalated from gas to coal, and we've seen a extraordinary spike in coal utilization, coal prices, and then followed by coal scarcity in certain countries that are literally calling us and asking for support for coal deliveries. This, as we go into the COP, having spike prices in fossil fuels across the range of natural gas, oil, and coal, which is leading to energy intensive industries to reduce output and in some cases shut in, which will of course lead to supply chain difficulties further where we have now that will affect renewable energy, as we talk about aluminum and copper prices all increasing. That won't have the immediate effect that we see today, but it will have the effect down the road. This leads us to the question of how do we look at an energy transition that is in a world where the global climate crisis is real, the energy transition is a necessity, and not only a necessity, but energy transition has to be ramped up and facilitated in a way that we can get there much faster and more rapidly, while at the same time managing the energy market so that we don't have energy shocks and that lead to potential economic shocks. And that's the challenge, I think, of the 21st century, is managing the energy transition in a way that allows us to continue to reduce emissions, accelerate that the efforts towards cleaner and greener technologies, while at the same time understanding that it's not a flip of the switch and that we need to have the ability to ensure that the world is well supplied with affordable and sustainable energy. And I think natural gas is clearly the area where we are still highly dependent on the fuel, specifically in Europe and certain parts of Asia, and ensuring that we have that supply on a regular basis. I think that this is not just the responsibility of us, of a global community that is looking as consumers to ensure that we have the supply, but on suppliers as well. And relying solely on contractual levels to supply the market is not going to be enough when we go through a disruption period, and ensuring that suppliers who have the ability to increase production during certain periods when there is a supply crunch, as we felt through now, and ensuring that people are not at risk of not having the molecules necessary for heating in the winter. That is the responsibility of suppliers to be able to meet global demand when we have it, while we all work together towards this era where we will not need fossil fuels at the same level as we make those decisions at COP and ensure that technology is available to allow us to get there as quickly as possible.
Well, thanks very much for that. I wonder if I can just ask a quick question. You missed the India minister's remarks, and he said something very interesting that I'm interested in your view on. He essentially noted that natural gas, despite being a cleaner fuel with significant potential, is quote yet to achieve its rightful place in global energy markets. And of course, a decade ago, the IEA produced its report on the golden age of gas. And gas markets have certainly gone through a period of rapid development in Asia and of course the US shale gas revolution, but that's largely an American phenomenon, and yet natural gas is being disputed in many mature countries. So in short, since the golden age of gas hasn't really arrived yet, I'm wondering how can we bring it forward, and what role does it play in terms of hydrogen and other clean gas?
Well, I think it's a great question, Joe, and I'm sorry that I missed Minister Puri's presentation. I can assure you these last several weeks, we've talked often. There is I think as we move forward in trying to understand the best roadmaps and frameworks to allow individual countries to get to lower emissions and to get them weaning off of fossil fuels and weaning off of high emitting fuels in particular. As you noted in your question, and I think your question is largely the answer, we're going to look at, the world is looking at new technologies that allows us to, if we can make them commercially available and affordable, will allow us to not only look at the drilling side of the emissions, but also the transportation side and the usage. And hydrogen is exactly that. And you noted we can have pink hydrogen and blue hydrogen and green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is still at a place where it's we're trying to bring the price down so that it is more commercial and economically viable versus some of the other sources that are more, you can see the roadmap to there is a little bit easier to see, and green and blue hydrogen is one of them. So as we look at countries like Ukraine and others that have been a reliable supplier of natural gas, we can start looking at how do you use the infrastructure that's in existence, the pipelines, et cetera, and can you start doing gas hydrogen mixtures as suppliers into Europe, and then transitions completely into blue hydrogen as long as countries are continuing to want that. We have to build the infrastructure for it. I think that's part of what Europe is taking the lead on and spending an enormous amount of money on hydrogen and other areas that we can invest. But this is not, if we wait for the economy to do it on its own, meaning the business cycle of having something that costs an enormous amount of money and over time and building out a scale, bring that price down, we're not going to get our goals. And that's why we're really doing a government intervention here to accelerate the technological cycle of investing and putting public money into greener and cleaner technologies that will accelerate their development, accelerate their affordability, and provide that credit in the middle. So that's my hope of what happens. I don't know that gas will, I think natural gas is, at the end of the day, is still a fossil fuel, and the world is moving at much more rapid speed. So the degree that the use of gas and the type and how we look at it changes, I think that's going to allow gas to stay in the system, but not for as long as I think people would like it to. Some people on this call would like it to be.
Well, thanks for that. I noted in my opening comments as we're meeting to discuss this energy crisis, the world leaders are gathering in Rome this weekend and then COP next week. I'm wondering if you might be able to preview some messages we might hear from President Biden at these two events regarding the gas crisis and energy security.
Well, I think that we see this as again as an energy crisis, because this is not just natural gas prices that have been elevated, but crude oil is at very high levels at the moment, at roughly in the 80 to 85 range, and gasoline prices in the United States today are at 7-year highs, as natural gas peaked at the same time. So I think this is an energy crisis. And we see some of the solutions that I think you'll hear the president talk about are similar in both the oil and gas, and that is that producers have a responsibility to ensure that oil markets and gas markets are balanced. And I think you saw that natural gas prices today are down on an announcement, simply on an announcement that that Putin has said that he has instructed Gazprom to increase supplies into Europe from November 8th. So clearly, I think the indication here is that the market was spiking prices because of a concern that the level of inventory in Europe was too low to meet many weather scenarios of a cold or colder winter coming. And just the idea that we can bring those prices down by an announcement that there would be additional supplies indicates that this is something that should have happened a long time ago. There has to be an effort to supply the market, and we're quite disappointed that Russia is not, Gazprom did not choose to increase investment in upstream production so that it could deliver additional gas into a crisis. I think that the solutions that we've been working on with our colleagues in the Commission and across Europe is to look both at this winter's gas crisis as well as how do you ensure that it doesn't happen in the years to come. And some of the suggestions that Commissioner Simpson and others have put forward about looking at minimum levels of storage across Europe so that we ensure that we're in a better position and we're not caught off guard again, I think those are important. So I think you're going to see that we want to do two things at the same time, which is what I started with. The president's going to talk about the fact that this crisis shows us that we need to accelerate the move from fossil fuels onto cleaner and greener, a cleaner and greener world, addressing the investment necessary in the development and the infrastructure that needs to be built out, while at the same time ensuring that that period of time that takes us to get from where we are to those goals, the market is well supplied. And that consumer producer dialogue that IEF was clearly created for is more important now than ever, to make sure that we have that dialogue and that that the market for consumers is well balanced and well supplied during this period of transition. So I think you're going to hear the president talk a lot about the need to accelerate the move towards that world that we are striving for, while maintaining the balance in the meantime.
Okay, thank you. And if I could just ask one more question, you mentioned investment, and certainly COVID really has impacted CapEx cuts in the oil and gas sector in 2020, and this year, at least on our report, we're tentatively projecting about a 25% CapEx cut this year. So that's 2 years in a row of CapEx cuts and new energy supplies from hydrocarbons. You mentioned the inventory issue in Europe, which I think is definitely an issue, as is the weather. But after the winter, we still, I think, have this fundamental issue of energy investment. And I'm wondering, what is the view of the administration on this investment, sort of peak investment, if you will, in the oil and gas sector?
Well, I think that I don't think that we necessarily have a view per se about the investments, because that is happening naturally in the market as the global community switches towards an era of investment into the energy transition. There is the lack of investment is coming from a variety of reasons, some of them from shareholders' demands, as well as the financial institutions not wanting to invest in fossil fuels. Clearly, I think prices today are indicating that these companies are capable and to continue to operate in a quite healthy manner with these elevated prices. But again, we're in this weird space of we know the goal that we want to get to, right? World leaders have clearly stated that. We know that goal, we know where we want to get to and when we want to do it. The goals we articulated for 2030, the new goals that states and countries are committing to for 2050 and 2060, including in the Gulf. And we just heard the announcements in the Green Summit hosted by Saudi Arabia just the other day. So we have a clarity of the goal and the timeline that we want to get to it by. What we don't have clarity about is the brief period, relatively brief historically, of this next 10 years of understanding how that transition is going to look. What investment is necessary to maintain that balance of supply to allow for the rest of the world to get to the goal that we want to? That is a really critical question. So I don't think the administration necessarily looks at how much money should be spent on investment, except to look at it as don't make investments in things that are going to be stranded assets afterwards, and things that prolong and take us away from the goal. So investments towards maintaining the current supply so that we have that balance, that is something that clearly needs to happen. But any investments into infrastructure that is going to be multi-decade infrastructure that only comes online later and that takes us away from the goals that we're achieving, that's the investment that we would see as unfortunate and unnecessary.
Okay, well, thanks for that. And we definitely take note of the investment in infrastructure in the president's infrastructure plan, and also particularly the investment in infrastructure for the transition. And also, more importantly, something that we're going to be looking at here is investment by governments in clean energy R&D, which again is another area where the administration has proposed this fourfold increase in clean energy R&D, and it's President Macron in France has offered a similar proposal, 30 billion by 2030, and other countries as well. So we feel that that's an area where investment also needs to take place, while at the same time, as you note, getting us through the next decade or so. So thanks again. I know you may have to leave, so if you can stay as long as you can, that's great. But I know you have other meetings as the administration prepares for these upcoming events. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. Now let's stay with the producing countries. The U.S. is a big producer and consumer, and it's my pleasure to welcome my friend, His Excellency Yuri Centurion, the Secretary General of the Gas Exporting Countries Forum. GECF member countries include Algeria, Bolivia, Egypt, Equatorial Guinea, Iran, Libya, Nigeria, Qatar, and Russia, Trinidad and Tobago, and Venezuela and Angola. Azerbaijan, Iraq, and Malaysia are observer members. So Secretary General Centurion, thank you for joining us. I know you had a busy week yourself yesterday with a big joint meeting with OPEC. The floor is yours for your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Excellencies, honorable ministers, distinguished participants. Good afternoon from Doha. I think it's my privilege and my honor to address the special natural gas producer and consumer dialogue organized by International Energy Forum. I would like to offer particular thanks to my friend, His Excellency Joseph McMonigal, IEF Secretary General, for extending the invitation for the Gas Exporting Countries Forum to participate in this initiative. And of course, we commend this initiative and commend the maintaining the producer-consumer dialogue with the intention and expectation to obtain more market stability and predictability. At least we are confident that this dialogue is aimed at this goal. Whilst upholding the fundamental principles of sovereignty and multilateralism, our organization, and I would like to appreciate your kind introduction of our organization, has decided definitely and joined the collective efforts of the international community as regards to provide uninterrupted access to modern energy sources and eradicating energy poverty, an endeavor that is aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 7. As an intergovernmental coalition of 18 major gas-producing countries, controlling the largest share of proven reserves, production, and trade of natural gas in the world, the GCF reaffirms its commitment to ensure its energy sector continues to make an effective contribution to overcoming the devastating impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, powering the global economic recovery, and accelerating the move towards carbon neutrality. However, the current narrative of historically high prices and low inventory levels challenges the universal energy security and necessitates the need to assess the causes of this crisis, its potential implications, as well as outlook for future development of energy markets. It's with deep concern that we observe how reduction of coal and nuclear generation in some countries, colder than usual winter, a lack of wind generation, growing hunger for energy in Asia, reorientation of some suppliers to this market from the European one have been causing an unprecedented imbalance between supply and demand. But there are even deeper reasons for the continued tremor. These market fluctuations on a wider scale are associated with budget deficit, disruptions in the supply chain, and rising inflation. Our monitoring shows definitely that the current situation is negatively developing in the activities of enterprises that operate in energy industries at the global scale foremost. Under these circumstances, GCF member countries have continued to prove their mettle as reliable suppliers of natural gas, even in the most severe waves of COVID-19, in order to fulfill our contractual obligations in front of our valuable consumers. And our member countries continued this despite all the increasing geopolitical, financial, and regulatory constraints. On the other hand, industry-wise, natural gas is increasingly being challenged by restrictive policies against fossil fuels. In fact, we have already seen the disruption that has been caused in reliable supply of gas due to lack of investments. And you mentioned today a few times with our esteemed speakers about the investment process, the smooth investing into upstream and middle stream of activities related to natural gas. From our point of view, this conversation of paramount importance for us, especially on the eve of G20 summit and COP26 in Glasgow in a week. Moreover, as a sample, potential expansion of the carbon border adjustment mechanism announced in Europe to imported energy sources threatens energy security and resilience of energy systems. Please pay attention to the warning expressed recently by one of our leaders, His Excellency Al-Kaabi, Minister of State for Energy Affairs of the State of Qatar, President of Qatar Energy, who mentioned that governments risk shooting themselves in the foot if they don't signal greater support to international energy companies and accept that gas needs to be part of the transition to meet carbon net zero goals. From the perspective of suppliers, GCF member countries adhere to the main principles stipulated in 2019 Malabo Declaration. That is the document adopted as the result of the discussions held at the 5th GCF summit on the level of heads of state and government. The Malabo Declaration supports the fundamental role of long-term gas contracts and the gas pricing based on oil indexation to ensure stable investments in the development of natural gas resources. Such a principle, we do believe, provides a solid basis for buyers to gain long-term visibility of their cash flows and protect their supplies against price volatility we are facing today. Today's fragile situation on the market obviously reveals that the accuracy and precision of energy forecasting and modeling is as important as it has never been before. Serving this purpose, the GCF has reserved its efforts to analyze and assess the various pathways in the energy transition context, and the results of these efforts are presented in our signatory Global Gas Outlook. To draft the outlook, we utilize the most advanced forecasting tool, Global Gas Model, which is underpinned by the latest digital technologies and elements of artificial intelligence. Our member countries' primary sources of information and the Secretariat's access to the world's largest commercially available economic databases allow us to produce 30 years forecast of 140 plus countries, covering over 34 sectors of the modern economy and 35 types of fuels. In this regard, the GCF cherishes its ongoing participation in the IEA, IEF, OPEC symposiums on energy outlooks organized by International Energy Forum. And availing myself of this opportunity, I would like to submit our appreciation for this giant and huge work done in the benefit of our member countries as well. We have attended a total of 8 times to date this strategic dialogue, including in February this year. As a shareholder of this prestigious energy program, our today's host, the International Energy Forum, has joined the rising consensus that natural gas plays a vital role in the world's transition to clean energy. And I would like to submit my personal gratitude for you, Mr. McMonigal, Secretary General of IEF, for your personal standpoint as regards to the natural gas. And specifically in your recent interview to Standard & Poor's Global Platts, you stated that the world still needs to be able to pursue progress on climate while at the same time powering the global economy, and that means continued investment in oil and gas. That is fossil fuels we are responsible for, which is fully aligned with the standpoint of the position of the GCF Forum as a whole and our member countries. Today, we commend many of GCF and IEF countries in common, which have already pledged to ensure net zero carbon emissions by 2060 and submitted details on their nationally determined contributions required by the upcoming COP26 meeting, while also maintaining, I would like to underscore this idea, maintaining and keeping their role as leading producers of oil and gas. At the introductory remarks, you mentioned about this vivid sample, the ambitious environmental programs announced recently, early this week, that is Middle East Green Initiatives. From our point of view, such type of initiatives may become an essential component of global efforts on the environment and an attractive example to put forward for similar projects by other countries. Speaking about GCF member countries, our member countries have placed climate action at the forefront of our priorities by continuing to focus on exploration of all possible options, from technology and innovation to research and development, in order to cement the role of natural gas as a solution for a balanced energy transition with adequate investments into oil and gas. Natural gas is one of the global enablers for reducing emissions quickly, cost-effectively, and steadfastly by replacing carbon-intensive fuels and backing up intermittent renewables. It also provides a competitive source of energy due to the diversity of production centers as well as supply routes. All major energy scenarios that earnestly backcast the attainment of sustainable development goals point to natural gas' pivotal role in the global energy mix. Speaking about projections, according to the recent ones made by the GCF and highlighted in the Global Gas Outlook 2050, natural gas and oil will provide more than 50% of global energy demand by 2050 under the reference case scenario. Therefore, a multi-dimension approach should be the way forward to deal with the climate challenge, in which the oil and gas industries form the bedrock of the solution. The forum's environmental knowledge and solutions framework has been initiated as a collaborative platform with designed measures to build capabilities and exchange expertise, specifically as regards to greenhouse gases mitigation practices. The gas industry, including GCF member countries, is fully engaged in adopting practices and developing technology options that support decarbonization potential of natural gas, including carbon capture, utilization and sequestration methods, and production of blue hydrogen and ammonia from natural gas. The recently established GCF Gas Research Institute with the location in Algiers in Algeria is set to become a crucial project with an aim to harness technical knowledge and novel technologies in this field. At the same time, we should approach decarbonization carefully and cautiously and prevent the artificial acceleration of greening the international agenda at the expense of the sustainability of our member countries' energy sectors. This is practically our slogan and main principle. The GCF aspires to present a balanced energy transition roadmap for a constructive debate that will enable policymakers to instigate and perhaps lead a realistic energy transition, notwithstanding the ongoing reductionism and cancel culture. We do believe that natural gas offers the balanced solution that the world seeks to achieve sustainable development goals. The future of energy, even if its contours remain vague, will be different. Collaboration today boasts the potential of unlocking tremendously valuable information for tomorrow, a future underpinned by an inclusive producer-consumer dialogue for the benefit of everyone. That's why we consider this initiative of IEF and today's dialogue between producers and consumers as of paramount significance for the GCF member countries and for the GCF Secretariat. Thank you so much for your attention, and I wish successful deliberations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Centurion. We really appreciate your comments today. I'm wondering if I could just ask one question and get your views on what role you see long-term natural gas contracts playing to protect consumers against price volatility, or whether you think there's another preferred approach. If you can give us some comments on that.
Your Excellency, I would like to underscore again that in Malabo Declaration adopted by all our leaders, one of the principles cemented specifically was the role of long-term contracts, as well as that is the supplementary to long-term contracts, oil and oil products indexation of prices. From our point of view, this is one of the serious solutions in order to prevent the price spikes like we are confronting for the time being. We paid attention that on the background of this crisis, and dear colleagues characterize the current situation as an energy crisis, we pay attention that our monitoring shows definitely that consumers have started their dialogues with producers, and for the time being they are discussing the return or coming back to the long-term contracts. From our point of view, under these specific circumstances, this is a cost-effective and quick decision to overcome this problem, in line with other methods and pathways highlighted by other speakers. I'm talking about Senior Advisor for Energy Security from the United States, Secretariat of Energy, who mentioned about the main directions of President Biden's speech in the forthcoming events.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Dr. Centurion, for those remarks. I think in the interest of time, we'll turn to our next session. I understand if some of the folks from the ministerial section have to sign off, but of course, we're welcome to stay and add your comments later. But let me start. I'm going to change the program around a little bit and start with Patrick Pouyanné, the chairman and CEO of Total Energies. It's a pleasure to really welcome one of the most advanced European energy companies and among the first movers on the energy transition. You were here in Riyadh, I think, last weekend at the Saudi Green Initiative. I saw you there and other places. You made some interesting comments about helping Iraq and with their methane problems. But we're very honored to have you join us today to give us your views on the current energy crisis. I think you're muted.
Yeah, good afternoon, and happy to be with you as well, and an honor to contribute to this dialogue between consuming and producing countries about natural gas. I think a lot of things have been already said by the ministers during the ministerial session. I will try to share some of the views, and probably I will repeat some of what has been said, and I will try to draw some few lessons of what I observed. I think, as it was perfectly said by some of our colleagues, we are facing a very unexpected supply and demand factors which have collided with more expected ones. I would say there was some, yes, it's true, but we have faced, I would say, some issues from drought in Latin America, in China, but there was also some few unplanned outage in some liquefaction plant, but the winter in Europe was colder than expected. So that's true, but there was a lot of different events. But at the same time, I would say there were some more fundamental events which happened, also more structural factors which have influenced the situation that we face today. One of them being obviously that gas is part of the transition journey towards net zero. It's an energy of transition, and there is quite a lot of demand, in particular in Asia, in emerging countries, China, India, and other countries, for gas. For not only because they could face from time to time some outages from, I would say, renewables, but also because we observe quite a clear policies in China and India to increase the share of natural gas in their energy mix in order to, I would say, organize a form of shift to coal to gas. So I think it is something that we should remember all, because obviously this situation with very high prices, for me, the key driver has been the huge rebound of demand for gas and so for LNG, liquefied natural gas in Asia. Because, of course, gas markets are fundamentally more and more interconnected. And the growing role of LNG reinforces the interconnection between the US, LNG in Asia, and the European gas markets. And I think that's one of the lessons that all policymakers should remember. And the LNG market balance remains, I would say, weak somewhere, because it can shift rapidly from loose to tight. You have a block of incremental demand from China can easily shift the market, as we observed it recently. And the supply on its side remains quite inelastic on the short term. You don't build a new LNG capacity in 1 or 2 years. It's not true. You need several years to do that. And then on the top of it, you have some few unplanned outages in some of the existing plants. Then you can really shift the balance of this LNG market. So, and things that Europeans must remember is that at the end of the day, LNG availability is really crucial to, I would say, limit price hikes in Europe. So LNG supply is key. And I think really that authorities should promote investments in the sector, not the contrary. And the current situation is also, from my point of view, not only, I would say, an increase of demand, which is again part of the transition, but it's also the result of low investments, in fact, in the LNG industry, in particular in the last 5 years. Gas, and why is it important? Because again, gas is really an energy of the transition on the long term. I think it's not realistic to think that we will switch in a blink of an eye to a decarbonized world. In the transition period, natural gas, in particular LNG, will play a pivotal role to curb greenhouse gas emissions in an efficient manner, thanks to, and you all know that, three advantages, specific advantages. When you switch from coal to gas in power generation, but also in industrial and heating processes, gas emissions are, let's say, 50% lower than coal emissions in electricity generation process. But also gas is instrumental in complementing growing renewable energies. At least provides the flexibility to cope with renewable intermittency and the seasonality of demand. We should all have in mind that the more we will introduce in our electricity mix, I would say, uncontrollable capacities of renewable energies, which rely on the weather, either it rains or the wind blows or the sun shines or freezing in Texas in February, then freezing events like happened in February in 2021, then we need to have in the mix some controllable assets, and gas-fired power plants offer that flexibility. So all that is quite, I think it's quite obvious, but I think we need to repeat. But really, I think policymakers must think to having to put in place a policy which encourages the investments in gas, because it offers a lot of advantage during this transition that we want to organize towards net zero. So that's the first point. I would also add two other lessons from consuming countries, if I can say, from what we observe. First, I think authorities in consuming countries were right to take some measures to try to protect B2C customers. For them, it's quite difficult to absorb this hike of price, so that was the right reaction. But more fundamentally, like in a continent in Europe, when you have organizing, I would say, a free market for gas, a deregulated market, but you rely on importing gas because your own gas production is declining in Europe, then obviously it's key to build some strategic stocks in order to smooth the move of the markets. I think it's the same advice that China is a policy in which China also entered following some events. It's important that I think we are building strategic stocks of natural gas in the consuming countries, like we have done it, by the way, for oil in the past. It will help again to manage these variations of the markets. And the other point is that I know that buyers of natural gas were very happy in the last year when the spot markets were low, but the reality is that for consuming countries, I think they should look again to the interest of long-term contracts. They should not be disregarded. And I think they could be encouraged. I remember we developed the LNG industry on some famous Japanese formulas with a S-curve. Of course, in the meantime, there have been in development of some spot markets, and the GKM market is established. But really, for a lot of countries for which I would say reliability and affordability of energy is key for the development of the economy, long-term contracts with some way somewhere to minimize the impact of high prices on one side and low prices on the other side, which is good for the seller, should be really considered, because they offer some way of stability to consumers, which really, again, at the end of the day, our mission is to deliver an even more reliable, more affordable, and more environmental friendly energy to the consumers. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. I have two questions for you. One is sort of a more immediate term, and another one is maybe a longer term. I saw in a recent interview that you gave, you talked a lot about how the current situation depends on the winter and the weather, and realizing that none of us are meteorologists. Wondering what your assessment is of the next few months, and do you see this as being the new energy reality or a temporary phase due to the pent-up demand from the pandemic?
I think on the gas side, obviously, I'm not a meteorologist, so I'm not good in forecasting oil price, but I will not be good to know if winter is cold or not. But we are entering into the winter phase, and so obviously the seasonality is not in our favor. So I think beyond winter, by April, May, we'll see. But I would say on the other side, I think the price could remain not as high as today, but they could stay in again, it's a matter of supply and demand. You have a fundamental trend to support the demand, not maybe as much as we observe, because again, maybe the growth in South China and Brazil will be behind us. And so there is a possibility that these events will be more controlled thanks to the weather, if it's possible. But on the other side, I do not expect much increase of supply in 22 and 23. You know, I remember 5 years ago, we were explaining that there were many projects, energy projects coming together. People were in the market saying there will be too many projects at the same time by 2025. And we were saying, yes, maybe, but look to what will happen in 22, 23, because it's an industry where, you know exactly what will be available. You know, we don't hide when we launch LNG projects, it's very public, you know, so you can really know what is the capacity. And 22, 23, honestly, there are not new LNG plants. The first to come will be N23, probably in Arctic Russia. And you don't have such a wave, by the way, because what we were expecting as a peak in 25 has been erased by the COVID, where we have all decided to, I would say, to postpone some projects. So that's a point on which we should not expect much from the supply side. Maybe some of the plants which had difficulties this year will recover, and we are working on that, obviously. So the tension is there somewhere, because fundamentally you have a demand, again, transition goes to gas. But obviously, if the price remains at the level of today, this will destroy some demand, and we begin to observe that some countries are shifting again back from gas to coal or from gas to fuel even, which is not good at all for climate change, for CO2 emissions. So I would say, yes, my view is that, but maybe I see Sharif will say the contrary. My view is that after winter, we could see a form of calm down on the price of gas price, but still remaining probably at a high level. I don't expect to see suddenly a price as low as we had last year or since 2019.
Okay, thank you. And for my longer term question, the IEF next year will be launching our IEF Latin America initiative. And I'm just wondering, what's your opinion on Latin America LNG in terms of it being in nascent markets like Colombia and Ecuador and Panama and others? It seems like there's some potential spikes in new demand there.
Yeah, you have countries like Colombia and others which might be open to use gas. It's also linked to the price we can deliver. Latin America has never been, the main markets for electricity and is Brazil and Argentina, which are not very easy. Brazil is dominated by hydro, as you know, with some volatility. So it's difficult, and we have been all faced quite a number of difficulties to convince our Brazilian customers to look to, I would say, more long-term contracts, and this year, they have absorbed, by the way. We speak a lot about China. Brazil was taking quite a lot of LNG to again, because hydro was not there, at quite high prices. So maybe there is also a way to think there. There is also a competition in this country with renewables, so the position of gas is not so easy. Argentina, same situation, where you have a strong domestic resource, but at a certain point, this domestic resource linked to local conditions was not enough, so importing some LNG there again. The country that you mentioned, I think again, when all these countries, the more you have each country which looking to how can I contribute for my NDC, which will be updated for Glasgow, to driving to net zero, I don't know, it's 50 or 60. In fact, all of the countries are introducing in their mix. It's either nuclear or gas if you want to complement renewables. You know, you need to do something. You cannot just let it like it was. And so I think that this is a market which has quite a bright future. I will tell you, since when we observe what happened since 2015, the energy market has grown more than 10% per year. My economist told me it will be 3 to 5% for the next 10 years, and I'm correcting that to 5 to 7%, not to say 5 to 10. I think you have some fundamental drivers again for this energy. The drawback is that what could make that derail if it's too expensive because supply does not cope with demand. Then of course, consuming countries could think that this energy is maybe not the right one, but then it's back to coal. So I think if the planet wants to fight with climate change, gas as really is part of the mix.
Thanks very much. Now let me turn to my good friend Sharif Souki, the executive chairman of the board of Tellurian. Sharif is a longtime friend and really a true gas market visionary and disruptive industry leader from the United States. And Sharif, I think you're in mountain time, so I appreciate you getting up early for us here as we balance our Asian participants and folks in the US. So it's good to see you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe. Ladies and gentlemen, secretaries, it's a pleasure to be here, although it's really early. When I finish, I'm going to go have my breakfast. Just a few comments to complement what Patrick just said. The first thing is we're trying to transition 80% of the world energy into 5% of the world energy. It's a daunting task. This is with a backdrop of an underappreciation for the insatiable appetite from non-OECD countries for additional energy, first because their population is increasing, and second because the standards of living are increasing. And those are the two determinants of energy demand. We're doing all this without a long-term policy that is coordinated. I've heard several people say that this is an opportune time to having this dialogue. I beg to differ. We should have had this dialogue 5 years ago, because then maybe we would not be confronted with the issues that we're confronted with today. We have a dialogue that goes on different levels that is not coordinated at all. You have aspirations in OECD countries for dealing with climate change. And you have realities in non-OECD countries dealing with existential issues that are a lot more pressing than what is going to happen 30 or 40 years down the road. In the famous words of a gentleman at one of the conferences I attended 2 or 3 years ago, one world is concerned with the end of the world, and the other world is concerned with the end of the month. And coincidentally, in the last 6 to 8 weeks, Europe just joined the other side of the world, because now you have the Gilets jaunes in France going back to the streets for a small increase in their gasoline prices. They haven't even seen the result of their electricity bills and gas bills for this winter. And they have adopted the same slogan. We're not interested in the end of the world, we're interested in the end of the month. And that is the reality that we now live in. The point that Patrick made about underinvestment in hydrocarbon sources coming now to bring things to a reality is absolutely crucial to how we're going to deal with the situation going forward. Strangely enough, the US now is the largest producer of natural gas on a global basis. And one question I would have loved to ask Amos is it our position when we talk about the responsibility of producers to deal with the issues that we include ourselves in that equation or not? The US is now the largest producer. It's also a very large consumer, the largest consumer. It is also in the top 2 or 3 exporters of natural gas. So we have a critical role into making sure that energy poverty does not become prevalent. On that basis, the one thing that is critical and very important is to be able to rechannel investments into the upstream industry to the extent that it is necessary in order to entitle non-OECD countries to continue with their growth, both from a population standpoint and a standard of living standpoint. I think a dialogue that says that we have a problem and you have to deal with it because we're going to cut off all the investments to the industry that is critical, is a dialogue that is not going to be very fruitful. We're going to be talking across each other. In terms of the prices, you now have $85 oil prices and the equivalent of 200, as you noted, Joe, gas prices on a global basis. That's not sustainable. So 2 things are going to happen. Eventually, after the winter, gas prices will come back down to a more reasonable level. But at the same time, oil prices will continue to increase to a more reasonable level also in order to justify and find an equilibrium. So $85 a barrel is the equivalent to about $14 or $15 for gas. I don't know if we'll get to that level. I expect oil prices will continue to increase and gas prices will come back down from very, very high levels. So when in a situation now, as somebody mentioned earlier, that we're dealing not with the gas prices, the gas is simply the leading horse, but we are dealing with an energy crisis. And generally speaking, when prices get high enough and you cannot provide supply in short-term basis, you're going to have demand destruction. And the first manifestation of demand destruction is going to be you switch from one fuel to another. But if all fuels become too expensive, then you ask people to start changing their lifestyle and try and start driving less, turning off the lights more often, not putting the air conditioning on, not heat your home. And I've seen, when I was in Europe last week, some TV shows talking about people that now have a choice in Europe about heating their home or eating 3 meals that are cooked. And that is not a sustainable situation. My great fear is the lack of planning is going to lead us to a global recession because we will not be able to deal with the situation that is coming now. And that will be what causes that would be the result of the demand destruction. One last point, policymakers have very nice aspirations, but they're not supported by their people. You ask Americans today to pay $1 more for filling up their cars, and they're not on board with that, no matter what the reasons are. You ask them to pay more for their electricity or their natural gas, they're not prepared to do that. So everybody is an environmentalist until they understand what the cost is to themselves. There are things that we can do. It cannot be a total approach. It has to be an incremental approach. One of the things that is immediate is switch from coal to gas, but you have to have the policies to encourage this. And when I say immediate, I'm talking about several years. I'm not talking about tomorrow morning. And then on a long-term basis, there are also things you can do to improve the environment and to improve the fight against climate, but these need to be thought through very, very carefully. I don't know if the right approach is to have long-term contracts or not in the market. It is becoming a commodity. You have different views. Different people will take different approaches, but a lot of the gas will come from Russia, Qatar, and the United States. And we have different ways to view how we want to make these investments in each one of the three countries. The rest of the world will account for 25 to 30% of global gas supply. But the signals that the gas is desired and needed are very important. And the ability to finance these projects is very important. And if you want to have a solution that is long-term, then you put research and development to develop those technologies that today are not available at scale to make a difference in the next decade. So that's kind of the framework. It repeats a lot of the things that I've heard today. It strengthened the fact that consumers are looking at one thing, producers are looking at some comfort. Everybody wants to know who's going to finance. It's a daunting task to transition from 80% to 5%. So we need to define transition better. We want to transition to what? And how are we going to do that? So that's the framework for me, Joe.
Well, thanks very much. I wanted to ask you, Patrick mentioned in his recommendations to consuming countries, something that we're starting to hear a lot more about, and this is the idea of strategic gas reserves, like the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and reserves that IEA countries have. What's your views on strategic gas reserves?
Well, it's critical. You have to have enough storage in order to address all the short-term issues that you may have. I mean, it's not surprising that it's going to be cold from time to time. It shouldn't be surprising. It's not surprising that the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine half of every day. So those are things that should be expected. So you're always going to have incidents, accidents, and sometimes you have more than one happening at the same time, and it creates a necessity. So I think having the adequate storage and having the rules that are required in order to fill that storage is critical, because that's what gives you a little bit of a defense against volatility. But the fundamentals are, our industry is still 11% of the world economy, and we're only investing 2 to 3%. It is not sustainable. So what I'm afraid of is we've gone now a steps change in energy prices on a global basis. Everything that we're talking about in terms of future technologies is significantly more expensive than even what we're paying for energy today. So if you look at nuclear or converting into a hydrogen economy to some extent, it's very expensive. It's not going to happen overnight without some very, very substantial investments. And we still need to decide who it is that is going to make those investments.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I hope you'll stick around for the.
I want to add one thing that for me,
yes, please,
kind of boggled my mind. If we today on a global basis use about 300 million barrel equivalent of energy, and if we want non-OECD countries to get to half the level of OECD countries in terms of energy consumption, we need to add the equivalent of 150 to 200 million barrels. That's just simple math. And going and telling non-OECD countries, you're not entitled to live the same way we do, is a non-starter. That's not going to be accepted.
Well, I heard that from the Nigerian minister over the weekend here in Riyadh. But stick around, because I'm sure we have more questions. But last but not least, I want to welcome Vice Chairman of IHS Market and Chairman of CERAWeek and author of the new map, Energy, Climate, and the Clash of Nations, Dan Yergin. I intentionally moved around the order of this session so that Dan might play sort of a cleanup hitter of sorts. We often see him as a moderator at events like this, but I think now more than ever, we need to hear analysis and thoughts about the global energy crisis. So Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joe, and Excellencies, distinguished leaders, and of course, Secretary General McGonigal. Thank you for that extra pressure to summarize it all, Joe, but this has been a really valuable discussion. I've been making notes on it. And so I do have a few comments to share. I do think it's important. I do want to acknowledge, by the way, that Sharif Suki just received the United States Energy Award for his contributions, not just to the US, but to the global community for what he's done in terms of the global LNG market and energy around the world. So congratulations to Sharif. I think this has been very valuable because it's acknowledged we really are in an energy crisis. And actually, you may not have intended that, but Amos Hochstein's remarks were very somber. And I think it's important as we're in it, and I think this has contributed to it, not to just say, oh, well, we just need more renewables. I think it really requires a rethinking, an honest rethinking about what's happened and why. And I think Patrick Pouyanné pointed to that in what we might call preemptive underinvestment in energy resources based upon scenarios about what will unfold in the future. Now, Total under Patrick has approached a comprehensive, really a comprehensive approach to energy, integrating hydrocarbons with renewables in a big new project that's recently been announced. But it is a fundamental factor that where we started, Joe, 80% of world energy is comes from fossil fuels. And so just to say, that, oh, we just need to do more of this and have yet another scenario is not very helpful. And I think Sharif has really emphasized that. The second point I want to make that comes out of this, and you know, speakers have mentioned it, and both Patrick and Sharif have emphasized that, and the ministers. But what do we mean by energy transition? This phrase gets tossed around. When I was writing the new map, I said, well, when did the energy transition begin? And we are now in the 312th year of the energy transition. It began in January of 1709, when a British metal worker found that you could make better iron using coal rather than wood. But all the other energy transitions have happened over a long period of time, century or more, and there have really been energy additions, one energy on top of another. In this case, saying that we want to go in 28 years or in 8 years to completely revolutionize the energy system on which a world economy of $86 trillion depends, and which will be $185 trillion maybe in 2050, is very, very ambitious. And you have to pay attention to the evidence that you get along the way. And we're getting evidence right now in this energy crisis. The third point, and you referred to not only our speakers today, Joe, but also to the Nigerian minister. I've been worrying that we'll see a new north-south divide. That was a phrase in the 1970s between the developed and developing country. I think listening to this discussion today, there is a new north-south divide. And it's a difference in perspective between the nations that represent 20% of the world's population that are the developed countries that have social welfare systems, that have wealth that they can spend on it, and developing countries who poverty and economic development is an imperative at least as important as climate. And there's a tendency, I think, in this discussion to move away from that or not to understand that. And I think Sharif addressed it, but we heard it from the ministers. The Honorable Hardeep Singh Puri from India, he talked about responsible pricing, but he talked about energy justice. And I thought the comments from the minister from Bangladesh were very, very interesting. He talked about, and I made notes on it, being priced out of the market, he worried about hype around renewables. And he made a point that doesn't get made, scarcity of land for renewable development. And then the point that gets made is that very little, these countries compared to the developed countries have very little carbon footprint per capita. So I think there is a real difference in perspective. I don't know if we'll hear it at Glasgow, but we will, it's there, it was in this discussion. And it gets to our discussion about the role of natural gas as such an important fuel and the question of adequate investment. And the question, which actually one of the economic advisors to President Macron has written a very interesting paper for the Peterson Institute, where he says this effort to push 2050 goals into 2030 is going to backfire because, and he wrote this in August before what we're seeing now, because he said that you will see a series of shocks that will be reminiscent of the shocks of the 1970s. And that policymakers, he said, are not taking this seriously. They're just waving it away and thinking it will not happen. But what happens if we're seeing now is not a one-off event, but we're going to have a series of these events because of this preemptive underinvestment that's going on into energy resources, and in particular to LNG, into natural gas, which has such an important role. And as Patrick emphasized, the lead time for development is not something where you just throw a switch. You're talking about 5-year lead times to get there. So for me, those are some of the really big takeaways from this discussion, is rethinking what's going on now and not just waving it away. Secondly, understanding that energy transitions are complex. You're talking about changing the foundations. And thirdly, recognizing there really is a north-south, at least difference, maybe it's a divide in thinking, and that the imperatives of the developing countries are not the same as the imperatives in the Netherlands or Germany or Norway or the United States. They are very different, and that represents 80% of world population. And I don't know if the Nigerian minister made this point, but for European banks to say we will not lend to natural gas pipeline developments like India, we heard $60 billion development. That's a form of discrimination. And it cannot just, you have to recognize the realities for the 80% as well as 20%. So Joe, those are some of my takeaways from listening to this very rich and thoughtful discussion today. So thank you for the opportunity to be part of it.
Thanks, Dan. And I'd like to ask you a question and then maybe get the thoughts of Patrick and Sharif as well on this. And you mentioned the Minister of India, Minister Puri. In his comments, he noted that natural gas, despite being a cleaner fuel with significant potential, is, quote, yet to achieve its rightful place in global energy markets. And I referenced earlier on that the IEA released its golden age of gas about a decade ago, but for some development in Asia, significant development in Asia, and really the US shale gas revolution, which is really just an American phenomenon. The role of gas is being disputed in many countries. So in short, since the golden age of gas hasn't yet arrived yet, how can we bring it forward, and how important is it that we bring it forward?
Well, I think we heard from the minister from India saying that India wants to go from 6 to 15%, and that's in a growing energy mix. And we heard from the minister of Bangladesh that how much they base their electricity on natural gas. So I think it's going to happen. It is interesting, the IEA, the golden age of gas, then it was underinvestment in oil and gas, and now this most recent scenario. And Professor Scott Tinker at the University of Texas has done a very interesting analysis of the IEA scenario from the net zero roadmap. That's the basis of Glasgow. What is it actually saying in terms of how you achieve it? And I recommend that analysis to people. But I think the message that we're getting is, look, if China says we're not financing coal plants in Southeast Asia, what's going to step in? It's going to be gas. And we've just done our own analysis showing that there's going to be a real shortfall that's going to affect economic growth in those countries. If they're not going to do coal, they're going to have to do gas. So gas has to have a more important role in a much more complex transition than a lot of the scenarios and the rhetoric would lead you to believe. And so that's why this rethinking, this is a wake-up call what's happening now. It's not something just to be waved away.
Well, thanks for that. And I should note that IHS is working, partnering with the IEF on the update of our investment report in oil and gas development and looking at what the CapEx cuts over the last 2 years mean in terms of supply demand in the
Joe,
coming years.
let me jump in. I mean, it was mentioned, who mentioned it, that, the banks don't want to finance development. Well, that's because the banks are under pressure from regulatory authorities. And that pressure from the regulatory authorities is going to grow more intense. And that is done without thinking about the global needs. It's being done by organizations that are basically financial regulatory authorities who are turning themselves into climate regulators. And we have to ask the question, do they really have the competence to do that?
Very good point. Thank you for that. Patrick, can I get your thoughts? The global age of gas, how do we move it forward? Do we need it? You're
I
muted.
think it's, there are good reasons why gas consumption is lower than oil and coal today. The two reasons is that it's an energy which is less dense, and the second is that it's more expensive to produce and to transport in particular. So the big challenge that we have faced is how do we manage to convince consuming countries and that yes, gas should be more part of the mix. China and India today were at 6 or 7%. They both want to grow to 15, 20%. And why is that a bit difficult? It's just a bit difficult because of the affordability, and because at the end of the day, for these two economies with a lot of population and the political major objective, which is obviously in these two emerging countries, taking people out of poverty and increasing the way of life. So the cost of energy is a fundamental element of any economic development. So that's why we had, and so the LNG industry as making huge progress in terms of lowering the cost down, but still, and we need to continue to drive costs down in order to convince these countries. But again, in all these national determined contribution, when we look to the China roadmap, you see that gas will increase. India, it was an important fact for me that Prime Minister Modi last week, Dan Yergin organized a sort of a summit of CEOs around Prime Minister Modi. And I was on my side expecting maybe that he was a bit more cautious about gas because, in India, this is a market which is very reactive to the LNG price. And on the contrary, I saw that Mr. Prime Minister Modi reiterate his commitment to gas, And so I think, by the way, as I'm investing in gas and renewables in India, I'm happy to contribute. That was a good voice. So I think that every leader see that. On our side, on the industry side, we must continue to drive the cost down. And I think, as I said, it's important that we convince these customers that they look to formulas which would somewhere protect their own consumers, And again, I think, of course, if we accept to lose part of the upside, they must accept to lose part of the downside, But I think it's somewhere on which I think the last 3 years did not help us because the stock market went very low with COVID, etc. And so the buyers were thinking that it was very good to be linked to spot. I think I would be them. I would try to put my eggs not in the same basket, 50-50, or protecting part of my supply, as taking care of my consumers. So that's the key point on which. So golden age is still in front of us because I'm convinced, and this is a whole strategy of my company. It's no more an oil company; it's a gas and renewables company. In fact, that we are building. I'm convinced that gas consumption will be even higher than oil by 2040 plus. You will see that energy will continue to go up. So having said that, we also know that there is volatility. So, but I think it should be a time where we engage into a dialogue on both sides to try to see or we could protect the consumer, not stabilize markets, not possible, but protect consumers.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, I was also part of that CEO roundtable, and the Prime Minister announced, I think it was $100 billion in gas infrastructure over the next 4 years. So a very aggressive approach. And I want to ask Sharif. I mean, can you comment on the Indian minister's comments that gas is yet to really achieve its rightful place in global energy markets?
I think he's absolutely right. I mean, the good news is there's plenty of gas resource in different places of the world. The bad news, as Patrick noted, is that the infrastructure to build it and move it is expensive. And you have to know what your market consists of. And we've had some terrible regulation, both in Europe and in the United States, discouraging the use of hydrocarbons in general and gas in particular. And the unintended consequences is, instead of achieving decarbonization, we are remarkably increasing carbonization, because Europe is showing up to COP26 having increased their coal consumption by a factor of more than 20%, and the United States is in the same ballpark. So with all the best intentions and all the best guidance and the rules that we've established and the things that we've talked about, we're having exactly the opposite impact. It puts us in a very bad position to go and preach to the rest of the world that they need to imitate us. So I don't see, I mean, look, my actions speak for themselves. At my age, I went and did another investment into a natural gas company. The difference this time is I want to be a fully integrated natural gas company, because I believe the gas is available in the United States at a very cheap price, and that the rest of the world is going to desperately need it. So Minister Puri articulated it extremely well, and I'm not surprised at all. There are no choices. When you talk about hydrogen or nuclear, you're talking about 30 years down the road. In the meantime, most of the developing world has some existential issues about raising the quality of life for their people. They're not going to wait to do that.
That's right. Yeah, I mean the IEF, of course, is the producer consumer dialogue organization, but we're increasingly becoming the dialogue platform for developing and developed countries as well. Dan, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about oil, since we have you here. And you noted, I think, in a recent interview that it's connected to the gas crisis, and that oil is sort of following gas. I'm wondering, where do you see, if you could comment on that, and then specifically, what do you see the prospects for U.S. shale now that prices are rising, and how has the investor company dynamics changed compared to 10 years ago?
Well, first, Joe, it's really interesting that, normally one thinks of traditional, call it energy crises, start with oil. Oil here is the follower. This is, basically this comes out of COVID, China as the workshop of the world going in overheating and going into higher gear, and running into these constraints of coal and LNG, and then radiating back to oil. I thought it was interesting when the Bangladesh minister said there's very little capacity for fuel switching, because that's a big question right now. Shale is, the companies are cautious. The public companies are very cautious, because there's a second shale revolution, which is their relationship with investors and the need to return money. So they're not going to spend all their cash flow on drilling. So the private companies, however, the ones that are owned by private equity, they're the ones who have really stepped up. We do see, so we're not going to see the kind of reactivity we saw in earlier years from shale. The next year, we're now thinking U.S. production could be up to 600,000 to 800,000 barrels a day. But, so that will come into the market with these kind of prices, and people will start to be a call as long as they feel that, that we're in a new price range, that we're not, it's no longer 60 to 80, but it's higher than that. And, those predictions that are coming more and more for people about $100. I'm not going to make that prediction, but that will get more activity. So the shale is one of the places. I remember Patrick once saying there are other parts of the world too where you can get a greater reactivity, but shale is where you can get reactivity. And the longer prices are up, the more reactivity you'll get in terms of production.
Well, thanks for that. Yes, we started the pandemic with oil as the main focus, and now we're hopefully on the tail end of the pandemic, and now gas is the making the headlines. So, look, I really appreciate
and coal.
Yes, exactly. As Sharif pointed out, all energy sources prices are rising. It's fuel switching might not be the answer right now. But with that, in the interest of time, I want to thank you all for participating. It's been a very impressive and valuable session, both this and the session with the ministers. So thank you all. Let me just make a few concluding comments. Energy and climate policy choices bring about real world change when aligned with market fundamentals, the physics of energy technologies, and producer consumer partnerships on which energy investment and trade rely. The IEF, as I mentioned earlier, was established to give countries an opportunity to avoid and respond to crises and reduce market volatility through dialogue informed by reliable data. We will reflect on today's discussions and really incorporate some thoughts into future IEF work and engagements. This includes, but it's not limited to, our upcoming IEF report on oil and gas sector investment, which we're partnering with IHS later this year in December, and of course convening the IEF IGU gas market ministerial that Egypt will host in 2022. This weekend, I'm off to Scotland for the COP26 meeting. I'm inspired by the leadership of governments that have announced their net zero targets, but I also hope success will be achieved by both developed and developing nations interested in a positive way. This will enable us to share efforts on prosperity in a future that is both fair and bright for all. We cannot build a global consensus on climate change on shaky market foundations, fracturing supply chains, and entrenching divisions. To achieve a swift and inclusive recovery and reach climate neutrality by mid-century, we must restore energy market stability as fast as possible. So again, thank you to all of our speakers and everyone watching today. Really appreciate it. Have a good day or good morning.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you so much, and have a nice evening.
Have a nice evening.